Welcome to the fun and exciting world of machine knitting. There are so many things that you can do with your machine. You can create fabrics from solids to stripes, fancy pattern stitches and lace. Hello, my name is Jean Knudsen, Education Director at White Knitting Machine Company. I'm here to get you started with your new knitting machine. Knitting machines are an exciting and challenging hobby with limitless potential once you know the basics. This tape is designed for the beginner as well as the experienced knitter, covering basic single bed and double bed knitting techniques. Everything you need to know to make even the most complicated garments. First, let's discuss the different parts of the machine and what they do. The White Knitting Machine is a true double bed knitting machine manufactured in France. A true double bed knitting machine consists of a front needle bed and back needle bed that are exactly alike and permanently in place. Having a true double bed machine means that you can do double bed knitting techniques such as ribs, cables, lace, and fancy stitches without having to make adjustments to your knitting machine. As you knit, the fabric comes down between the beds. Since both beds are the same, the stitches produced on the front bed look exactly like those produced on the back bed. The needle bed closest to you is called the front needle bed. The back needle bed is away from you and is sometimes called the main bed. Plain knitting is called stocking stitch. It is knitted on the back bed alone. The front bed is used to create purl stitches. The front bed moves back and forth. This is called racking. Each time you move the front bed one notch to the left or right, you are racking the bed one needle to the left or right. The long white lever at the left side of the front needle bed is the racking lever. The racking scale at the left side of the lower slide rail indicates your racking position. You can move 8 needles to the right or left. A small plastic arrow, called the racking indicator, points to the racking position that the machine is in. It is now in position 4.5. The brown lever at the left side of the machine is the space selector lever. It moves the front needle bed either closer to or further away from the back needle bed. This is an exclusive feature of the White Knitting Machine line. It adjusts your machine to the type of yarn you are using. The numbers are the distance in millimeters between the needle beds. 4 is 4 millimeters, 5 is 5 millimeters, and so on. If you're not sure where to set the space selector, set it on 4. This is the position you will use most often. The front bed also moves up and down. The brown knobs at each end of the front bed are called bed position levers. They release the front bed so that it can drop to a lower position. Now you can see what you've knitted. Don't try to knit with the front bed down. It must be in either of the two knitting positions in order to knit. To return to a knitting position, place both hands in the center of the bed and push up. It will click into place. You have 2 lower positions to access your knitting. Squeeze, then release the bed position levers. You are now in lower position 1. Squeeze and release again. You are now in the second lower position. Remember, these are not knitting positions. To bring the front bed back to a knitting position, again, place your hands in the center of the needle bed and slide the bed up. It is exactly level with the back needle bed. This is the normal knitting position. Most of the time, the front bed will be here. The second knitting position is called the upper position. The front bed is slightly higher than the back bed and presses the knitted fabric firmly against the back bed. Squeeze the bed position levers together and push up on the front bed. The front bed is higher than the back. The upper position is an exclusive feature of the White Knitting Machine line. It is used when knitting on the back bed only. You do not have to knit with the front bed in the upper position on all single bed techniques. Almost always, having the needle beds in the normal position is sufficient. In the normal position, the front bed is level with the back. To review, you have 4 different bed positions, 2 knitting positions, normal and upper, and 2 lower positions to access your knitting. To repeat, this is the racking lever, the space selector lever, the bed position levers, the racking scale, and the racking indicator. This small semicircular lever is called the intermediary lever, and it sets the needles on the front bed either across from or alternating from those on the back bed when you're knitting with needles on both needle beds. The needle beds are made of anodized aluminum. Each bed has 180 grooves containing one needle. It slides up and down. The upper slide rail guides the carriage across the machine. The lower slide rail serves the same function. Along the lower slide rail, there is a numbered scale starting with 0 in the center and 90 at each side. Each number indicates one needle. Whenever you are knitting, you must use the same number of needles on each side of 0. This will help you increase and decrease and will ensure that your knitting is balanced on the machine. The distance between each needle on the needle bed is 5 millimeters. This is called the gauge of the knitting machine. In order to knit, the needles slide up and down inside the grooves of the needle bed. The needle moves up, catches a loop of yarn from the carriage, then pulls the loop down through the stitch from the previous row to create a new row of knitting. This happens very quickly as you move the carriages along the slide rails. The needle is actually a tiny latch hook with 3 basic parts: the hook, the heel, and the latch. The large hook, combined with the 5 millimeter gauge and the space selector lever, make owners of white knitting machines able to knit a wider range of yarns than owners of any other machine manufactured today. The latch is used to close the needle hook so that the stitch cannot slip off the needle. The heel is the part of the needle that slides through the cams of the carriage to move it up and down. The needles have 4 different positions indicated on the needle scales found at each end of the front needle bed. Position 0 is non-working position. That means when you slide the carriage across the machine, the needles do not move and cannot knit. Working position 1 is your main knitting position. To place needles in position 1, use a simple stitch selector to slide them up so that the heel is level with the number 1 on the needle scale. When the needles are in position 1, the heels pass through the cams of the carriage and move up and down. Each time the carriage passes across the needle heels, you have knitted another row. Working position 2 is also a knitting position. You will use this position when you are doing fancy stitch patterns that require needle selection. When the needles are in position 2, as you pass the carriage across, the needles knit, then return to position 1. They remain there until you move them by hand back to position 2. Position 3 is called holding position. This position is used when you want to knit on part of the garment while holding stitches open on the rest of the garment. As an example, when the point came to create the neck opening of this sweater, 1/2 of the needles were put into holding position, while one side of the neck was completed. These needles knitted normally. When the first side was finished, the needles were returned to working position and the second side was completed. To review, position 0 is non-working position. Working position 1 is your main knitting position. Working position 2 is for fancy stitches. The needles knit, then return to position 1. Position 3 is holding position. Most of the time, as you knit, your needles will be in working position 1. So if you're not sure, that's a good place to start.